the flipping the funnel part of the language is, well, you go job spec out into the internet, top of funnel, and then whatever comes in, and you have to screen and have qualification calls and then reject 590 people versus, well, let's start with 10 or 20, see how right we think we are and see how many of those find this position attractive.
Hey, this is Gareth Webb, and you're listening to Breakout, a show that cuts through the hiring noise. Here, you'll get an unfiltered view on what early and growth stage companies are doing so that you can take their best practices, processes, and frameworks and implement them to help you build teams more confidently.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Breakout Podcast. I'm here with our host, Gareth, and I have a little bit of a different episode we're going to do today. Breakout's been evolving a little bit, and so I wanted to go through and talk through what that looks like and discuss what we are getting to in this episode. But we're going to kind of break down the framework or methodology, if you want to call it that OutScout team uses to help find talent. I'm hoping that this can be helpful to teams or individuals who are kind of looking to do this on their own, or maybe don't have the resources for an external partner or a full talent team to do that. So yeah, hoping this can be a helpful, kind of more tactful episode for those. So yeah, Breakout, we have interviews with the CXO type and talent leaders to talk about, scaling and building teams and companies. There's no real change there. We have some episodes now that are going to be more practical on discussing with hiring teams and managers, just getting to know them a little bit more, what makes them tick, what they're looking for, to help, those looking for new roles. I'm doing quarterly checks with you and Dan. We actually just recorded our first episode, probably will be just released after you're hearing this. And then, yeah, lastly, this episode type is going to be more tactical and kind of focused on, a framework or process that we can kind of break down and hopefully package up and deliver in a helpful way for you to go away with. So, Gareth, thanks for joining.
No, cool. It's good. I like the reformatting. I think it's good that we're changing up to have different types of conversation. Saw a post this week on LinkedIn from Harry Stebbings, who does the 20 VC podcast and then now has his own VC, and he talks about, doubling down on being super niche. And we know that anyway, right? Just from the world of business and talking to different customers, and being niche works. But I think for us, like, hiring is an expansive discipline and there's pockets of niche everywhere. So I think we can't be too niche. But technology, leadership, startup scale-ups, that within that niche, there's all these sub-niches that I think we're tackling in the right way. So yeah, it's good. I'm glad to have slightly different conversations about it.
Well, let's dive in. So, I hear this constantly internally, and we've been talking about how we kind of package this up. But, we have a very specific kind of process that we follow in terms of helping to find top talent for our customers. So what I'm hoping to do today with you is kind of speak through this and hopefully leave with a better idea of exactly, what this is, and provide a blueprint, if you will, to our audience in terms of, if they want to run with this process on their own.
Yeah.
So, you've mentioned this as kind of like a best fit first framework or methodology. Is the official name? Do you have a name for it? What are you officially calling it here?
Best fit first is like what it actually is, and that's how things should be done. I will endeavor to come up with a slicker, more advanced product-like name, I guess. But best fit first is essentially like time is obviously very finite, and energy is not, but people's patience for finding very good people in the industry we work in, the patience level were low. Trying to just produce pipelines and source candidates for me is not good enough. And that's kind of why we exist. And most of our internal, like our counterparts who work in-house at our customers, they have their processes. I like to think we bring a sharper, more disciplined approach every time, because there's a higher expectation with what we do, because people are paying a lot more for our service. So yeah, best fit first is like, well, best fit because everybody wants best fit, and first meaning let's start there, let's not just hope for a hire, but let's make sure that we've run the sort of diligent approach so that when you make a hire, you can sort of sleep at night as well, knowing like, yeah, okay, we definitely did scour the earth for the person that's going to have the highest likelihood of success, not just for taking the job, but like a year or two down the line, like they should have the most impact. That's kind of what I think it means.
Got it. That's helpful. Do you have like, are there certain stages that we should be thinking about, or do you have like a, here's the three kind of overarching themes for this, or how would you kind of further define that?
Yeah, I mean, most things come back to like the formulation of a job description, which people don't read. I say that all the time, but like most companies don't spend long enough at the very beginning, like front loading who they want to find and who's going to do this job and who's going to be successful in the job. So I think the very beginning piece is the most important, where you are understanding what the position is and how you're going to measure that, the person's success against that. It's not just a selling description, it's a functional spec around, what someone's coming in to do, how they should do it, what they're going to do it with, who they're going to do it with, what the outcomes are. So that's all very, that's more from an HR people perspective, and then talent acquisition historically get involved in finding it. I think actually both need to be kind of having that conversation, especially with the hiring manager. But yeah, I think that the definition of the position, and then there's two parts to that. One is, like I said, the functional spec of the role, and then that should in itself produce like a profile description of what the top kind of people should look like. And that doesn't really happen either. We do that. We try to translate job description into profile or set of profiles, and then you go about the calibration process. So there's a whole front loading of making sure everyone knows what they're trying to find and agreeing on that, and then taking that towards a calibration process. Those are kind of like two very closely linked pieces, which I think result in getting the best fit first. But I think most people just jump into wanting to see CVs, resumes. Like most hiring managers are like, oh, I need this, here's a description, send me a bunch of resumes. Like that's just like playing a roulette essentially. So that's not what we're in the business of doing.
So we've got, this first piece you mentioned the prep and defining the role from a few pieces. One, the functional spec, right? To taking that and turning that into more of a profile description of, what will eventually turn into search criteria, and then calibrating on that, which takes us to the kind of the second stage, right? Which is actually doing the search, right? I think you mentioned before, we've kind of called it internally, flip the funnel. Do you want to talk a little bit about that too, just a high level? We'll dive in, more specifically in a little bit, but just want to hear kind of this overview.
We spend a lot of our time trying to educate people in a non-patronizing way about it's all about like stacking the odds in your favor, right? In any business, in any role, unfair advantage is what venture capitalists talk about when they're investing in somebody. They're like, does this person have an unfair advantage that we're investing in? That could be knowledge, background, insight into a particular business or industry. So most, I would say it's a crazy high percentage of people will just jump into write spec, get that spec out into the world, see who comes in, because it's cheap, right? That's a cheap way to recruit, is write a job spec or lift one off another job, which is even worse. I'm sure ChatGPT is now deemed to be the sophisticated way to write a job description, but that's just taking other job specs out there and putting it together for you. You still, that's not how to start. So I think 90% plus of the world will get the job description put together, publish it on the internet, and hope for the best. Sometimes it might be successful, but it will be the lowest cost, like lowest entry point, I would say, into accessing talent, i.e. harnessing the internet. But that's kind of a 20-year-old methodology, and that job's going to quickly be in front of millions of people and everyone can just apply with one click on LinkedIn. And that's how you end up with 1,000 applicants over a weekend or more. So I'd say like, that's what most people are out there to do. We're trying to educate people to say, we'll turn it around the other way, put your desired outcome in front of you, get the position nailed down. What does a perfect profile look like? What attributes do they have? Where have they worked? how many years of experience have they got there? When did they work at a company? Like, what stage company have they been in? Have they done a mixture of startup and enterprise? Like, that's the kind of thing that we get quite a lot, is we want someone that's got the polish of an enterprise employee, but they understand the resourcefulness required at a startup, for example. Like, so there's two things you need to find. Yeah, it can be education, obviously skill set, tech stack, all those things. So once those things have been established, you then have the ability to calibrate and find which is what we do, which is then, right, here's 10 sample profiles. We think these 10 sample profiles are all 9 out of 10 against this spec, or close to 10 out of 10. Does everybody agree? Like, push that out there to all the hiring team, and then hopefully you get yeses, and then you go about activating people being candidates who are close to that profile. So the calibration then instigates the activation of live candidates or people who want to talk and engage. Now, the reason that's more difficult than putting the job out there and having applicants is people's perception is that though everyone applying is really interested in the role because they're actively looking for a job, they're more likely going to move. That's just not true. Like, lots of those people might be absolutely winging it, or they might be in 20 other processes and you're never going to understand where they are. So in the way of like best fit first, or like position, calibration, activation, going out front of people, like, you're basically testing your hypotheses first, really. That's how I would sort of say. You're using your time wisely. You are talking to people who have been identified as being a very strong fit. So your time is being spent wisely, making sure that you are right, and that you can try and interview those. So say it's the top, we talk about like using time well. We try to find the top 10 profiles very quickly. So I will say to people, like, we need to find the top 10 in 10 minutes, top 20 in 20 minutes, or it's top 60 in an hour. So top 60 people in an hour. We use that time well to very quickly try and put together a list of who we think hits the specification or the position or the profile to insane levels of accuracy. And then only then, once you start getting the position and the selling points in front of people, do you know if they're actually wanting to commit. So that's the flipping the funnel part of the language. Is, well, you go job spec out into the internet, top of funnel, and then whatever comes in, and you have to screen and have qualification calls, and then reject 590 people, versus, well, let's start with 10 or 20, see how right we think we are, and see how many of those find this position attractive. Because again, that's the other thing. They might be a good fit, but they might not be interested, or they might be a good fit and they might be interested, which is great. So using time wisely, testing your hypothesis with the first 10, 20 profiles who you've gone on outbound, like outwardly selected and tried to talk to. And that's the tail not wagging the dog. The tail wagging the dog is job ad out there, see who comes in, going out and actually like selecting people first, and then trying to evolve that process is far more proactive, controlling, working towards a successful outcome. So yeah, that's what we mean by that. It's like governing who is spoken to first and limiting the access of who hears about this position is what should happen for these positions, which are very, like, I'm talking about critical, highly skilled, well-paid jobs. I'm not talking about like a graduate hire like that could be done.
Two follow-ups on this. I want to dive into some of the numbers too. You mentioned, 10 in 10 minutes, 20 in 20, 60 in an hour. I want to kind of talk about some of the numbers behind that. So let's put a pin in that real quick. But I think, at least for me, my head kind of goes to, when you do flip the funnel like this, right, and you don't have this large talent pool, I think you could make the argument that, how are you still ensuring, you're getting a diverse and equitable talent pool, and there's no bias creeping into the process? Like, what's your take on that?
Okay, so there's different types of bias, first of all, and there's the biases which are good, like a bias meaning, well, I know that person. There's biases which is like, first of all, we've got a position and a profile defined, so someone has to be within the realms of qualification for that position and the markers or the indicators of quality that we're looking for or success. So that, this is where you talk to some people and they're like, well, biases are a good thing. It's actually how I form judgment. those biases for identifying factors of success, performance indicators, traits, or skills that are going to essentially give us an indication that that person is likely going to do well in that job. You want to keep those. It's more the unconscious biases or the unhealthy biases, right? Of just finding people from, let's just say, top 10 schools, because the likelihood is those folks, again, I'm potentially generalizing a little bit, but like, you don't want to ostracize people who are not from sort of wealthy backgrounds, right? The mindset of most of our customers these days is they want to find the best fit, and part of that fit is like the trait of grittiness and resolve and doing hard things. So it might be people who have come from not the most straightforward backgrounds, right, in life. So like, those are the biases that we're trying to eliminate. Is the bias that everyone just goes for, oh, I'm just going to look for people from Meta, Google, Amazon, from the top 10 schools. Like, that's not going to solve your hiring problem necessarily, but it might, this does exist, and it's kind of like, I call them like logo hunters, whereas people just hiring for their list of proven brand names on a resume, which doesn't mean someone's bad, but it doesn't mean they're perfect for the job either. So I think that's what we're trying to get away from. I think we're not in the business of telling customers exactly who to hire. We're in the business of saying, here's your sensible choice of the best fit folks. Your interview process and your team's consensus should decide who is hired. We are not here to tell you who to hire. So if you want to hire a male, female, person from a minority or underrepresented group, that's entirely up to you. We're not in the business of doing that. I don't want to commoditize people to that level. We're here to say, you've asked us to give you a pipeline for this position. Here's 10, 20 matches. Run a really good process. We'll help you run a really good process. Pick who you want to hire. We'll help you hire them. We're not here to say, here's the best person, here's the second best, here's the third best. That's just not how it should happen, in my opinion. I know that search firms out there will put their name to a top tier candidate and a second tier and a third for a search, but I don't actually think that they should. So that's kind of where I see it. Like, we're always trying to get in front of every kind of candidate available, whether they are, like I said, like male or female, or from whether they're white or whether they're from a minority group. But we're not trying to place more of one type or another person. We're here to make sure the best people the best fit folks get considered and then hired. And that's up to the employer. So I think there's always going to be, if a customer's telling us they want a position filled in 30 days or 60 days, there's things they can tell us that will make that harder, and it will take longer, potentially, just based on the numbers of the talent available. It's very similar to like a client telling us, hey, we're in LA, we want 3 software engineers, and they have to be in office 4 days a week in LA. That's just a fact that those stipulations will make the hiring more difficult versus fully remote. And then it's the same for if there's, diversity metrics that customers want to achieve, and that's up to them.
I mean, it sounds like it's coming back to understanding the data and just on what's out there, right? The pool wise and the constraints of what they're looking for.
I mean, yeah, well, every time we talk to a customer and they ask us about diversity, we say to them, this is the exact answer. We will endeavor to give you really good representation across the board of the talent pool that exists. And then it's up to you. Like, we're trying to find you the best fit of people who are motivated. We do have a curveballs, which is kind of a name we give, which is like not dead on spec, but really talented people who we think could do a good job and you should consider them. That's just internal language. And, but that doesn't mean it's a curveball based on like ethnic background or sexuality. It's curveball based on they might be a bit more junior or they might have come from a different industry. Like, we're just trying to basically keep the matching process to the point where we give good choice, but it's a smart, educated choice. It's not random. It's just like, here's a good selection of people that we think you should consider. And people will say no. Like, that's part of choosing, right? It's like saying, yeah, we'll interview these 2. We're not going to interview those 2 for those reasons. And that's kind of like, that's the buyer's prerogative, unfortunately. That's just the way it works. That's how, people select and deselect.
Well, let's dive into the numbers as my second follow-up here. You mentioned 10 and 10 minutes, 20 and 20 minutes, 60 and 60 minutes as an example, and kind of how that work should be done. To dive more into that, like, do you have like a benchmark in terms of like how, I guess, the timing it takes, right? We kind of answered that, right? But what's the response rate typically look like? I'm sure it varies, but do you have a kind of benchmark you like to shoot for?
Yeah, well, I think, like, first of all, the reason I say 10 and 10, 20 and 20 is just, there's an old-fashioned phrase that what gets measured gets done, right? And if you don't put some time constraint, like, constraints are a good thing in hiring. They really are. Like, you know, you can have all the tools under the sun, you can have a massive team, and you still might not do as well as two-person team with a phone and an internet connection. Like, making the right approach, you know, you can get better results. So it's this strategy and the logic that you apply, and then the understanding of the industry, like who are the best companies, who has what technology stack. Like, knowing industry, knowing the market, is that expertise is very, very valuable, which is why we outperform. But I think, so that's why we kind of give it a number of, like, look, the way I think of it is, like, if you've got an hour, you should be able to find 60 really good people. You've spent a decent period of time up front defining the position in the profile and setting up search calibration criteria. Then it's a case of just getting on with it. And they're healthy numbers as well. Like, you can't, you know, let's say, for example, I would say on average response rates between 20 and 30%. So if we're trying to activate 50 people, 10 people might be willing to talk to us, maybe 15. And then let's say we present half of those folks to the customer based on interest and compensation lining up, or, you know, people taking their time to go do some evaluation. So let's say it's 30% because it's a good position and it's a good, well-paid job and it's an exciting company. We target 50 people, 15 want to talk. And then we say we present 8, like, and the client interviews 2, 3 a week. That's like 4 weeks work of interviewing. Maybe they can do more. So, you know, I'd say, going back to like our matching metrics, typically, I'm sure it's more this year because of people want to just interview for fun because they still think the market's terrible. So let's say it's 10 matches per hire. So, okay, we've got 10 matches. We probably want to talk to 15, 20 folks to get the 10. We're probably looking to sort of get in front of 50, 60 people. So, you know, it could be more sometimes. And then obviously you have like a perfect process that all goes well and then the person gets chosen and they join. But sometimes things happen where someone changes their mind, position gets redefined, matching has to start again, like the process has to start again. So I think, yeah, but that it's a lot more work than putting the job out. But I'd rather do that work than have to deal with 1,000 applicants, deal with all the DMs, deal with all the follow-up emails with irrelevant people who have no business applying for that job, but they apply because they can, or they're trying to wing it because they like the look of the compensation, you know. And we've all been there. We've all applied for jobs we shouldn't have applied for. It's just too easy.
Yeah, I mean, easy apply is the
easy
literal name, right?
Yeah.
And you know, to be fair too, because I do know we run those ads as well to help kind of capture maybe people we didn't see in the search. There's always people that come in. So I think what you're saying is like there's a place for both, right? But if you're going to prioritize your time, this needs to be probably the number one priority in getting that set up and making sure you're getting in front of the right people, right?
Yeah, but there's a very different reason why we would run those ads, is because like we have jobs upon jobs upon jobs for our different customers. So if someone applies and if they make it through the filtration process, let's just call it that, and they're a strong candidate, they're just not a good. There's two things to consider, which we do. Is one, is somebody a high quality individual in the technology market? Yes. That doesn't mean they get matched to every single job, because that's far more nuanced. So we still want those people talking to us and in our platform so that we can say to them, oh, look, unfortunately, the position here is not the best fit for you for X or Y reasons, but there's 2 other positions here that have just come through this week or going live in a week. You will be a top match for those. So it's worth our while doing it as a way of engaging the marketplace. Whereas if you're posting a job or 2 and you've got 1 job, 2 jobs to fill and 1,000 applicants, then it's mostly just disappointment. And there's no follow-up actions there. So that's kind of why we do it.
Got it. I want to back up really quick, kind of going back to the prep and definition, and then we can go kind of to our third pillar, if you want to call it that, which is more of the outreach and follow-up. But going back to the prep, you mentioned, calibrations and ensuring there's a very defined kind of profile to be going after from the search and setting that up. I'm sure the answer is going to be this varies, but I do want to ask if there are any, kind of must-haves, like, is there a minimum of, hey, I can get a pretty good search started based on these criteria that you find, or is it a case-by-case basis?
Well, the position criteria, profile criteria.
Like, sometimes we would wait for a full job spec to come along to go and kind of build the search, but I know sometimes we can move much faster based on, hey, I need to know these 3 to 5 things. Like, does that exist? Is there a kind of list of things that we could give to someone to say, hey, you want to make sure you have these at least identified to kind of at least help constrain this search initially?
Yeah, I honestly sometimes prefer it when there's no job description, like, because we can build the position out ourselves in platform. So I'll take a good example. I won't say who the client is, but one of our customers, they're hiring for a VP of IT, like corporate IT in the US. They didn't have a job description. They likely weren't going to have time for another week, which is an eternity. Okay. So we set up a meeting on the fly, went through, the customers actually walking somewhere or driving somewhere, and we built the position out ourselves in platform. The main thing we need to know is, right, what's the title? What are they looking like? What's the size of the org they're looking after? What are the top 5 like stack ranked responsibilities? This one was like governing all internal corporate IT for global business, building out the security, the information and data security strategy, managing post M&A integration, and had done that previously multiple times. And then it was things like documentation, certifications, like for things like audits and such, had to be security cleared to be able to deal with customer systems. So that was like those 5 things. Then it was like, what size of company would be best from them to come from? And the answer was not too small, not too big. We're talking about 50 to 500 mil of revenue, probably private equity backed type business. And then that was enough. And then the comp, and then we interpret that into a profile, send sample profiles, when we send sample profiles to customers, we're asking for a couple of things. It's either a double plus, like 2 ticks, or double pluses for like, yes, very good, or 1 for strong. And then it's like negative is like, yeah, I don't know, like don't feel good or bad. Then it's negative, double negative. So we're looking for we want customers to get excited by profiles, because that means that you're likely just going to have like a better process in general. But we know then that they've understood us, that we've interpreted their position correctly, especially if there is no position and they don't have sample profiles for us. The other end of the spectrum is we've had a customer in May, and it was just very refreshing. The customer, he was the SVP of sales. He was looking for a VP to work a certain part of their org. He had the specification, sample profiles, people who he'd already tried to hire himself ready for us. Like, he'd done a lot of our work that we normally have to do. So sometimes people come prepared like that. So
must be the dream.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty dreamy, and it's gone very, very well. So this again is like, do it all up. The problem is, right, everyone's very stressed out and busy and hiring. They know they're going into a process. They know they're going to have to do a bunch of interviews, which is repetitive selling and question asking. I think we can all agree nobody loves it. Like, I like interviewing for Outscout because I feel like it's an exciting, reasonably privileged thing to be able to do. And like, I get excited finding people who I think can bring value to us and our customers. But I know that a lot of execs just do not want to do it. So it's like anything. If you don't want to do it, starting is the hardest thing, right? Like, if I say to you, go and run 20 miles, Jake, hardest thing would be putting your shoes on and taking the first mile or two is going to be really, really hard. And that's exactly what it's like with hiring. Everyone just has this mental blockage. So that's why we're sort of like, look, you don't need a spec. We'll build it out for you. We'll talk to you about it. We'll help with sample profiles. And I think that is perceived to be very valuable by customers, because we're doing all the heavy lifting before the job's even really started But for us, it's just like, if we get that bit right, the rest is going to be easy. If that bit's not right, then we know we have the data to back it up, and the rest of the process is going to be far more arduous.
Got it. So I just want to recap these here because I think it was really good. So you mentioned this criteria. Let me know if there's anything else too. Title, compensation or range of compensation, if that's the case. The size of the org that they'll be, in charge of or responsible of, top 5 stacked ranked responsibilities that they need to be able to do to deliver on outcomes. Any hard certifications or things that may exist with that specific role or job. The size of the company profile that they ideally would need experience having done or managed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing that was all of them that I had written down, but I'm curious if location comes into this at all, like remote, on site.
Like it goes in different, like the easiest is remote because we get a bigger talent pool and you can arbitrage comp as well. Like that's what lots of customers are doing at the moment. So, they're trying to, on the one hand, if they're in the Bay Area, they probably want people in the Bay Area. We're seeing that as a trend. If they're not in the Bay Area, they're trying to avoid hiring in California because it's like they'd rather have people in lower cost cities to save on comp sometimes. That's just all philosophical. Like we're not really getting into that. If someone's decided they want people in the Bay Area, fine. If they want them in the office 3 days a week, 4 days a week, which we do have with certain customers, it's just going to take you longer. Like, you'll still make a good hire, but it might not be in 4 weeks. It might be in 8 or 12. The matching volume is going to be lower. And so, I think it's remote, then it's hybrid, then it's how many days a week in the office, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it's in office full time, and we rarely come across that. Like it's typically hybrid, but I think 80+% of our customers are probably remote first or fully remote with travel. I don't know the exact stats, but I think it's probably 80 to 90.
It will help so much with just opening up the talent pool, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I think they're really strong candidates who have the most choice because they're the most in demand. They get the most approaches. They get the most internal agency folks reaching out to them. Like they're going to set their own terms, and people have already decided, like, how much is it worth to me to not have to go into an office at all, or 1 or 2 or 3, 4 days a week. So, like, I don't know. I know for you, for example, like if I said to you, you had to go into an office 5 days a week now, that would be a big no-no. And, we've all just become used to a certain amount of choice and freedom. And for hiring, especially like these kind of like, 150 to 250, 300K a year folks, or much more if you factor in bonuses and stock, like there's a fiscal price on what that means to them. So most companies don't want to compensate for that. So, but I get why people want people in. Like, it's far less anxiety inducing knowing everyone's in a room doing work than having to put your trust in them actually going out and doing the work. So I think that's what it comes down to. Or you're stuck in a lease and all that kind of stuff. There's a separate conversation there. But I think, if you're fully remote, you have a better chance of having a better pipeline and more choice. If you want people in the office 3-4 days a week in certain expensive cities, you're just going to have less choice. It might take you longer. You can still make the hire, and that's all fine. So just choice.
Good summary there. Let's jump into the last pillar of this because I want to get a little bit more here. We haven't talked too much about it, but the last one you kind of mentioned or did mention is outreach. And I know you've mentioned this before in the past. I'm sure many people would agree with this, but the results are in the follow-up is the quote I pull from you. So a couple of things here. Can you just give an overview of what this looks like, why that's important? And then I think this is interesting too. Just, I guess the third piece is, tools. It seems to be a lot of tools that kind of fall into this piece in terms of helping people find and engage with these candidates. Are there certain things that you find are required for this, or how would you go about, instructing this piece get done?
I think this is actually the main reason why people just put the job out there and let it come back, because outreach is hard, quite clunky, repetitive work. And if you don't have an infrastructure, with software licenses or your own proprietary kind of methodology or tools, then it's actually really difficult because, there's also a whole school of thought in a lot of people out there, which is, laughable, but a sign of the times we live in, where people think outbound is like dirty and invasive and ruining of people's privacy. Like, how is it bad if if it's a good fit and it's gonna give someone a good career elevation or quality of life? Putting a LinkedIn message in front of them, or an email or a phone call or a text, is hardly something that's like terrible, right? You're not trying to push credit on them or anything like that. So there is a whole school of thought there, and I know that exists with a lot of customers, and especially a lot of internal teams where they don't want to be hustling and putting outbound or cold calling or headhunting. But there are teams that do it, because I know their bosses and they tell me that they're trying to get them to do it, and we do it, and headhunters do it, and agencies do it. It's like, if you're good and you believe in what you've got to offer, and you believe that the person at the other end of the email or the phone should consider it, then it's all about the delivery of how you present it to them. It's not the case of just presenting it to them. So I think, obviously you've got LinkedIn connections and follow-ups. You've got in-mails you can buy. You then have tools which can automate your LinkedIn. I don't know all of them, but they're like DocSoup, Octopus, various others, which I'm sure LinkedIn will eventually, we all know when we're getting that happen to us. And I'm sure that those days, again, so you don't have to use everything to its full capacity just because it's available to you. But I think a tailored, short, bullet-pointed, tailored message is often enough to say, like, you're a strong fit. Here's why this is an interesting opportunity. Can we discuss? There is obviously nothing better than really good people coming to you. So running an engine or referral mechanism, or, just setting up your data set for really strong talent pooling and being able to systematically get in front of those people is a skill and a process worth investing in day one. And we do it, and I talk about this a lot. Like, I think in 2-3 years, we will have a full real-time indexing on the talent available in the technology market that is accessible to customers and can be accessed very, very quickly. Obviously, there's stuff around email, getting through spam filters and stuff, which is making the game difficult for just sales in general, but also for recruiting. So again, like, just having messaging that is genuine and not mass templated, that's going to get through in front of folks. You can phone people at work or on their mobile phone, or you can email them like to their work email. Like, if you're having to guess it, like if you're a recruiter in a firm and you need to get in front of 5 candidates and they're not responding via LinkedIn, then you should be doing what you need to do to get in front of them. There are, again, some questions around ethics, around like, is it okay to email somebody at work about a job? Happens all the time. Someone can just delete it, screenshot it. They could reply off their personal, or they could call you. I'm not saying everyone should go and do it, but I know it happens. It's been going on for years. I used to do it years ago when I was headhunting. At the end of the day, you might piss off 5-10 people, but if 2 or 3 people are like, hey, this is great, and somebody gets a job and a much better lifestyle for it, and they're building a very cool product, and they have a better life for their family as a result of getting a better job, or whatever that may be, right? Like, then fine. It's not really the end of the world, is it? I do think, like, everyone's got to be really careful about ramping up their levels of spam and automation. Like, again, like, we all know when we're receiving it, and it's kind of, it's exciting and interesting if it's relevant, and it's really irritating if it's not. So that's where human judgment has to come into play. But yeah, I think you could just phone someone, like the top person on your list, the best candidate on your list. You could just phone them and get them on the call, get them into process, get them hired. Like, that happens. Doesn't happen very often, but that just means you've got to be super proactive. So I think that's what any recruiting team should be. They should be indexing, building out talent pools. They should be trying to enrich the data where they can with email addresses or phone numbers. They should be looking at who already works in their business and who might know other people who are in your sort of top lists. So, like, using network effects, using referrals. And again, it's just like asking the question. If someone you speak to is amazing and they're not interested, they probably know other people that are nearly as good as them, or in their sort of professional circles that might know. It's just a case of asking, like, do you know anybody else that could be interested? But I'm pretty sure most people just don't. They put the phone down and move on. So that's even if they're on the phone. So I think it's just, it's a bit about being holistic in your approach and being persistent.
Got it. Yeah, the outreach piece seems pretty straightforward. I was going to ask, and I think you've kind of answered this here. It seems pretty straightforward. And where do teams go wrong? It sounds like you just still need some kind of tooling and processes available to do that. Sometimes that doesn't exist depending on the size of company and team you're talking with, right? And some people don't necessarily want to or do follow through with that, which sounds like that's kind of the other piece. And I think thirdly, which you hinted at, but just to clearly kind of tie this back, is the big downside with inbound and doing these job ads is a lot of teams do get inundated with having to filter through and sift through all these other profiles. And if that time is being spent there instead of, like you said, with all this kind of proactive recruiting activities that should be going on, that's where things start to break apart, right?
Yeah, it's time. So if you're being dragged down by shitty activities, which is sifting through applicants and 98% not relevant, why bother doing it at all? But the problem is that's easy, busy work that most people want to do or be seen to be doing, and they can go and show their boss, hey, look, I went through this many resumes and I've got you these 3. And if the people are being honest, they're probably not excited by those 3. That you could go and get some really strong, exciting, highly successful or high likelihood of success profiles by doing it the other way around. It's just you've got to do a lot more thinking, and you've got to do a lot more organizing, and you've got to do a lot more actual hard work. It's harder to sell to someone, right, that's got no idea why you're talking to them or emailing them versus someone that's already applied. They've read it, they know the company, they've sent their resume in. You talk to them, they're all geared up for it because they want a job, need a job. So they sound maybe a bit more energetic. And that's an easy conversation for an internal recruiter or an agency recruiter to have versus picking up a phone and saying, like, hey, Jake, found your profile. You look really good fit for this particular position we're hiring for. Can I talk to you about it for 60 seconds? And, if you're interested, we can talk more. Like, that's harder to have. That conversation is just inherently harder to have, which is why a lot of people don't headhunt anymore. And also people are, I hate the fact that people are scared about getting outed on LinkedIn for doing a job. Sales leaders do it, don't they? You get folks who are like blasting an SDR for sending an email that was not quite accurate enough. And I got approached the other day about a business that was trying to host an event for fintech leaders. And I was like, why am I in this email? Like, I'm not fintech. I haven't done anything finance related for, a long time, like 10 years. So it's weird. That must have just come up in my LinkedIn profile somewhere, and then I got caught up in a massive blast. And it's just, that's where people get annoyed, right? If you're approaching them with stuff that's not relevant or accurate. If it's relevant and accurate, it's fine, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think relevance is the key there. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up. I think there's a couple of things I wanted to summarize here and make sure that you agree with. But best fit first sounds like it really is a robust kind of process to follow. There's a priority in terms of this should be done before or in addition to, but before any like inbound kind of job ads are done, but really it being a more focused and intentional approach and making sure you're getting in front of the right people for the job. Is that a good way to summarize? Would you add anything there?
Yeah, one of the things we talk about in the team, I forgot to mention this earlier, but it's like, if you can't imagine the person doing the job based on their profile and kind of what's been discussed, like we don't know everything about everybody, right? So there's parts of people's profiles we won't know until we've spoken to them, but that's just nuances of like the profile and then the kind of deeper resume factors that need to be established in qualification. But if there's someone that you're talking to and you can't see them doing really well in an interview at the very least, or doing the job, they shouldn't be in your list in our methodology, right? They should only be in the list if they've got a good chance of interviewing well and getting the job, or getting the job and doing really, really well. And I know that essentially people are just kind of like lured into this trap of having to talk to people and having to show that they've presented the position to people. But if you're presenting it to the people that aren't ever going to be a good fit, or they don't have the markers of excellence or quality that our customers want, like good commercial career progression, promotions, robust stints, been at companies that have done hard things, been successful or failed kind of nobly, like had sort of something that they've done that didn't quite work out, but it was hard to try. Those are the things our customers want to see. Like if they don't have those things, then there's absolutely no point in trying to talk to them. So, don't try to get in front of them in the first place. You're just creating pointless work.
You mentioned this to me briefly before we started recording, but that this can almost have a kind of negative impact or effect potentially, given that, there's a lot of work that gets done that doesn't necessarily get seen with this, where if you're just showing, let's say the first 10 people you reach out to, you actually have someone who's interested who is the perfect fit, right?
Yeah.
And they're moved into process right away. The negative downside you mentioned is sometimes the hiring teams or managers feel like they still need to see more. So what's your thought or answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the tale of 2023 and 2024. It's like, okay, the market's not great. We're hiring, we're legends, we're performing well, no one else is. We should have like this red carpet of top tier people that we want to interview, even if the position is not like absolutely the highest scoring position or the comp is slightly off, which, we've got a good example of a position at the moment. It's a VP role. We carried out this whole methodology, upfront calibration, really hit like best fit first. The second person they interviewed, but first 3 matches, second person they interviewed, they were like, we love him. He's the best fit. We really can't see any fault in him, but we want to see more people. And it's like, okay, well, we won't find necessarily more like him or of him, but they're more similar. So we've been doing that. And every conversation I've heard is that, oh, no one's as good as him. No one's as good as him. So I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. Let's just make sure he's being moved through process at the same time. Like, otherwise he'll just get annoyed and drop off, or someone else will hire him, because there are lots of people hiring, even though the market's not 2021, it's still a buoyant job market for really good people. So that's the educational piece. And that's where, this process can bite you in the backside, because you show people the best 5 people up front. They like 1 or 2 and they want to see another 5, 10. Then you get a decay in interest from the talent pool. So this process, if you go best fit first, you've got to tell the people that you're matching the 2 that this is best fit first, not like here's the first we happen to find.
Yeah. I'm sure some data to kind of help set context to that, in terms of just here's the talent pool size, here's who we reach out to, kind of provide some numbers to be like, how that got down to that number, I think is probably what you're getting at as well.
Yeah.
Great. I know we ran way over, I think, our intended time. Let me ask you one last thing and we'll conclude for the day. I thought this was a great conversation. If you can leave our audience, reinforcing one thing from this framework, from our discussion today, what would that be?
I would just say try it first. Try best fit first. Like if you have a position that's not a really junior position, but it's like an important role, like sit down with the team, don't write the spec, just kind of make a list of like objectives and outcomes, and then try and translate that into a profile, and then go and try and find them 5 or 10 folks. So if you're an internal recruiter of one and you've got some founders or execs putting pressure on you about position, as long as you have some resources and you have a LinkedIn account, try the best fit first approach, see if they get excited by the profiles you send them, and then just get moving along that path, rather than write a job spec that people won't really read, putting out on the internet, and then creating a horrible shit ton of work that you don't want to do. You do not want to get involved in. It's just messy, noisy, reactive work. So I would say just try it for one position, give it like 2-3 weeks, see how you get on, and make sure you are backing up like the data. If like I targeted 120 or 60 out of 300 that I'd initially identified, got it down to 10, here's 6. Like that should be enough for any smart individual to be like, okay, cool, like that. These folks look good. We've covered it in the right way, versus just taking the path of least resistance, which is the inbound Armageddon. Great.
We actually are in the process of releasing a scorecard to help with that first part of the process. So for those that don't know, we have the OutScout hard drive is being released soon, but it's essentially a toolkit to help those hiring teams and job seekers alike. So think resume templates, scorecard templates. We're working on actually building this and kind of outlining it as well, the best fit first. So those who are interested can take it as a blueprint and actually implement it. So more to come there. Gareth, thank you. This is a great discussion. Hopefully will be beneficial to listeners looking to implement it.
Yeah, for sure. I think everyone should be doing it, and it will save lots of time. It will save lots of heartache for job seekers who think they should be hearing back about a job they should never have applied for. No disrespect to anybody, but this is just how it should be done. This is like thoughtful, intelligent, resourceful, time efficient hiring. This is how it should be done, I think. So yeah, hopefully people listen, input, and give it a go.
Great. Thanks, Gareth. Until next time.
Cheers, Jake. Thank you.